you know what? We need an admin. So they've
Greg
got
is
a
now
dungeon
recording.
master. So what are we calling this thing? Arc?
So I called this. Well, are we talking about the thing overall, or are we talking about this particular session?
Well, the thing overall, I guess, like if this was a radio show and we were going to do a thing, an introduction for our listeners, what would this thing be called?
DMs After Dark?
DMs After Dark. That sounds suspicious. NSW.
Yeah, I know, but it's also fun because then maybe you'll get some people that come to listen to it, and they will just think that it's something
We're just gonna
completely
lure in the
different.
deviants. That's the key.
Subscribe for the naughties, stay for the dungeon master tips.
I mean, we can either do that, or we can just call it DM Talks or something like that. I don't know. I have no idea what to really call this. I just thought it would be fun to have. I don't know, something.
Yeah, no, it sounds okay to me. Well, welcome to Talking Dungeon Master Heads. No, that doesn't work.
Yeah. And we're still waiting on Dragon, I believe.
Well, Dragon is a very handy addition, though I hope his connection holds up. Hey, we got a panic.
Hello?
Nobody panic. Anyway. Yeah, apparently this Craigbot's very good at doing recordings. It will even do a separate audio file for each person. So, I can actually edit things.
That is very cool. You can just be like, no, we don't know no voice in here. Can't have that Australian influence. Boop, 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 boop.
Just apparently it will record up to like 6 hours.
That's impressive. You can actually do a whole game for that.
Yeah. Apparently a lot of people do this for like live plays and whatnot.
I'll be honest, I would love to try a live play, but I could never do it with my home group. The amount of times we have to stop, look up rules, or just be like, you can't do that, but the spell says this. Read the whole spell.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I've not necessarily wanted to talk on here about, but like wanted to make a little TikTok about, because one of the things going around, or rather resurfacing, is the whole, oh, well, I'll just create and destroy water in a person and end up killing them. Which is actually not really possible by raw, because a person doesn't count as an open container. Even if you were to create a laceration, I would rule that you would have to have an intimate knowledge of every single vascular system within a person in order to deprive them of that water. And on top of that, you're also missing line of sight. So, because you'd have to be able to see in the quote-unquote container aspect.
Well, just chop their head off, and then they're basically like an open vase.
I mean, you're not wrong, but I think that defeats the point of destroying the water inside of them. Unless your intention was to make a mummy.
What about create water to use as effectively for a counterspell? If I do it right in their mouth, they can't use any verbal components.
I mean, you're not wrong, but at the same time, I would imagine the spell basically shuts off the moment that they shut their mouth. Because then you've lost line of sight.
Fair enough.
But yeah. Let's still waiting on Dragon to come and join.
Yep.
This is all like potential things that are going in the gag reel, by the way. You mentioned gag reel, so now we're gonna have one.
Oh no. I've done myself in. I'd say that was an Australian thing, but the Americans have got that handled.
A well-placed burn. Well-placed burn. I can't deny it.
But no,
We are rather adept at shooting ourselves in the foot.
yeah. Don't worry, you can just blame it on violent video games.
Anyway,
All right, we got ice.
ice, baby.
No, ice baby should be sleeping. We just want ice. Junior ice needs to be resting.
That's true. I just put my 2 to bed.
Getting on to listen and support. Hi, friends. Hello, ice.
So, what are today's talking points?
So today, what we are going to be talking about, as soon as I can bring up the stuff. Well, our topic that we chose for this one, and by chose I mean Dragon was the first one to speak up and pick a topic, was to have talk about high magicking a setting or industrializing a setting, because D&D has a lot of wonderful settings, and you've got Eberron, you've got the one that was just released of the Radiant Citadel, although I'm not sure if I would call that necessarily a proper setting simply because of the limited scope of it. But there's a lot of things that go into that, and when people go to look at a D&D saying, such as the one that we chose to use here, which was the Forgotten Realms and Faerun, sometimes that leads them to a discontinuity between the amount of magic that is capable and how the setting reflects that. I mean, for example, we know that there are so many wizards and magic users and innately magical creatures that traipse around this area. And yet, there's no good economy that's built around it. There's no good industry that's really built up. I mean, you do have select areas, like Waterdeep is more medieval castle style township that's there. But when you create a world, when we look at the typical standard, there are all these, magic item artifacts that you have access to as a DM, and yet there's nothing that really reflects that. It really just reflects the old style Dark Ages feudal system that doesn't do it much. And I thought it would be cool to have a talk about how could you, if you were trying to world build, make a world that actually reflects this opportunity that is rare. Maybe it's rare enough that it's not very common, and yet if there are items that your adventurers can end up finding that are utilitarian, that are any amount of this, or if they're not the only ones that can ascend to these higher levels, how does society really reflect that? How can we build a world that actually reflects the capabilities that adventurers have? If you have an adventuring town, what might that actually look like if you have adventurers that can actually get up there in level, such as wizards with the ability to reach levels where they can cast fabricate and build fantastical items, where they can build castles and towers, and how does society change based around that? So it's a kind of broad topic, but we could narrow it down with a couple more pointed questions.
Well, I suppose for myself, the first question I've got to ask, at least for everyone who's kind of paying attention, listening along, is what exactly do we mean by a high magic society that's being reflected properly? Do we simply mean a society where there is someone who has access to really high level magic, 7th, 8th, 9th level spells? Or are we talking about the sort of society where every kind of kid who goes to school learns how to cast a cantrip?
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I think for me it comes down to how ingrained magic is in society. So a good example is like Critical Role. If you compare the like different EXU stuff, there's their ancient society. Magic is ingrained in their day-to-day lives. Like the news is reported through magic illusions and stuff like that. Whereas a more like setting close to what we have Forgotten Realms or Critical Role, like season 1, there are magic items but they are held by like powerful people. But the common day-to-day person can't press the stage of their kitchen or doesn't experience magic day to day. So both have like 9th level casters. The society in one is built around magic, while the other is a medieval society with magic in it.
Definitely.
Well, yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And it raises a question for different questions in different societies, as you said. And depending on how broad your D&D setting or world is, you're going to have potentially more than one type of these societies, which is going to lead to even more questions being asked.
Definitely, and I'm glad you actually brought that up because I was actually really excited for this particular topic to get chosen and talked about because I just got done listening through the Critical Role's Calamity, and that made me very excited about the topic because it's been always kind of like a sticking point with me because as you mentioned, like there is a question of, what's the level of magic intricacy and availability to it, and what's the scope of magic. But the way that Forgotten Realms in particular, because that's the one I've looked at the most, has presented it, or rather I should say D&D as a whole has presented it. They have the concept of the weave of magic that permeates everything that there is in creation. And given the ability to become a wizard, it basically only requires you to try studying something. Yes, you have to have a little bit of a higher intelligence in order to be able to do anything good, but technically anyone could try to become a wizard. I've always thought, especially given some of the lore background, because you have, these master mage colleges and nations which have built themselves around having war wizards and stuff like that. I always thought that it was a little bit weird that it was still very medieval in its appearance in almost everything that I've seen that was based on, the prime material plane. So
I have this
go ahead.
I have this horrible image in my head of wizarding schools that are set up much like the universities are, and you have to pay or get loans so you can get your first spell book to be able to cast your basic magic. Because if you think about the magical classes, wizard's one of the ones that you don't just need to have a basic levels of intelligence and the ability to study. You also have to actually have a buy-in. You need a spell book. And from what we know from a gamer side, at least from what we can see. A spellbook can't just be any old thing. It has to be something special. You can't simply go and grab any old piece of paper, write it down, and say, haha, I have a spellbook. So there's this image in my head of a society where if we are expanding to a high magic society where magic is much more common, there's also almost an indentured servitude sort of deal for those who have the ability to cast, which would then color how they would view the rest of society and how they might use their magic and abilities.
Well, you also compared historically to like Greco-Roman societies where they had very like an intellectual class or people, but they had universities, they had very advanced mathematics and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But the common person was like illiterate, couldn't read, didn't know math because universities were for like the forgot the word aristocracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a setting like Forgotten Realms, that's kind of the theme that wizard magic is for the elite who could afford it. Either you're born into a family like a sorcerer, or you have the money to go to college like a wizard or something. And the common person is that like normal civilian, illiterate, maybe definitely illiterate in magic, etc. And yeah, so like historically, if you compare like college education to magic education in this setting, there is like some parallel you could draw. It's not completely unfathomable and just unfathomable in our current society.
Absolutely. And I suppose another question that comes up for me, at least, in the idea of the society where magic is for the elite, for the aristocracy, is, and we've already seen this with alchemy, and with the advance in some tech magic. Why haven't we seen more technology slowly expand out, even if it's simply the basic stuff, for the rest of society that can't use magic or can't access it as easy?
Yeah, that's definitely another point to kind of bring up. Not even just the incorporation of a bigger availability of magic, but also, what happens with technology and how does that evolve? How does society get around? There are, just to take Forgotten Realms, these, as you pointed out, Panic, these individuals that are fantastical in their amount of power, the aristocracy that hold on to this power, how is it that they get by? I mean, we've seen it in some corners of the world. I mean, you have your stereotypical, builder gnomes and everything, but not every place has builder gnomes. How is it? How do these other things kind of reflect, or is it simply just a discontinuity, or how can we get rid of this discontinuity? Would be an interesting idea, because I like the way that, not to necessarily keep bringing them up, but I like the way that Matt Mercer has kind of evolved his world, where you have the progression of technology is really starting to happen because of the limited availability of magic and the lower influence of religion in that world.
Mm.
In particular, because you do get a little bit of taking away from scientific innovation if you don't have need for like healers, and you know that faith is a really big thing in your world, which in standard D&D lore, the gods are very much a real and known thing, even if they don't interact with the world that much. Everyone knows that there are the gods, that they have once walked the earth.
Well, not only that, some of the gods themselves used to be mortal. So the idea of godhood is not exactly, while extremely rare and dangerous to attempt, it's not out
Mm.
of reach. We
Well,
have. Oh, go on.
I think the lore is that after the Raven Queen, it that kind of option was cut off, and it is no longer in reach. The whole ban on magic above 10th level and stuff like that. But that's deliberate because it happened before.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say we've got a couple of comments from No Mic Chat that have rung up that were quite interesting. I think another point is that wider society may look at magic users with distrust. Would probably be aware of some of the types of illusion powers they might be capable of. Maybe not with the quite a disdain of puritanical New England in the 1700s or 1800s towards witchcraft, but something along those lines. I mean, that raises an amazing question about if magic is more prevalent in society, how are the different stratas seen? Is there a caste system almost between those who have and those who have not?
Oh yeah, and I actually think Ice, you've actually gone in the wrong direction with this one, because I mean you do have illusion magic, and that can be somewhat scary, but the real scariness, the real type of magic that should be outlawed is enchantment magic. Because if we're talking dominate person, dominate monster, charm, friends, all these things that change the way that people think, that may not have a visible suggestion or a visible representation, like the suggestion spell, can be insanely bad for society. Well, King, I suggest that you abdicate your throne. Like that, you would need to have specific countermeasures built into this. I was actually talking with Voss the other day about this. How simply, like, even in the marketplace, you would need to have something which cancels out spells if you were trying to build a high magic society, or a high availability magic society. Because there's spells that are like from the book Acquisitions Incorporated. There's actually a spell that is the only purpose of it is to inflate the value of an item, to make it appear as if it is one grade higher in terms of its presentation.
And I mean, the idea of that sort of magic being widely available actually creates a whole other market of charms and amulets and things that can help protect you from that. Even simple things that mechanically, as gamers, we would see as providing advantage to a save would be extremely valuable. And you probably want to have that access to those sort of items for your merchants in the marketplace, for your judges, for your police officers. Just to provide another layer of safety against what would be considered a rather nefarious and insidious type of magic. I mean, we look at it, we say necromancy is often kind of the bad black magic, and it's often looked down upon. Whereas in reality, when we're looking at it logically, as you said, it's not necromancy that's the big bad; it's enchantment. I think if there was enough respect given to the way necromancy was used, it would actually be almost used industrially rather than for mostly nefarious purposes. I did see another comment here from Machine, which I thought was quite interesting. I actually haven't considered before. What happens when the magic users unionize?
Yeah, and I like that question because it really comes to one of the points that I would suggest that you focus on if you're building your own setting. If magic is going to be widely available, or even if it's not, I think the big question is, how does that affect the world? What are the consequences of that particular part? Because I mean, if magic is widely available, as E-Machine puts in, do they unionize? What happens if they unionize? Does that make it easier or harder to get access to magic?
I actually think unintentionally, Panic has done us a really big favor here. He's posted a image, a GIF here from Avatar, the Bender universe, which has in its own way with bending its limited form of magic, and it's got enough of a series where it's expanded into different types of societies, and we can see how at least a basic magic user and a bender, how that affects a society, even when we're not looking at the wider forms of magic. Even if we're just talking about evocation, elemental stuff, they're still ending up in positions of power. They're ending up as the chiefs. They're ending up as the people who are in charge of the marketplace, in charge of the law for your world. They've got enough focus where they're deciding whether countries are going to war. They're deciding whether countries are going to be at peace and how that peace is going to be constructed. And that's using even the limited magic of that universe.
Yeah, I mean, there is actually a mirror for that in the Forgotten Realms universe. The Wizard Kings of Thay, I believe, is how you pronounce the nation's name.
Mhm.
Where you had these god kings, basically these people that had ended up building up enough magic and ruling over people because of their magical might. And it's a question of, would there another question I would actually ask to prospective people that are building their own homebrew would be, is there a counter to this magical might? Is there a way to stop them from being, the god kings of their aspects and leading their respective troops?
I mean, we see in Avatar, we see the rise of a cult of effectively anti-benders, anti-magic users who are, in some ways, we see because of the anime itself, it's not clearly pure, but it taps into the idea for the average citizen that maybe the casters shouldn't be in charge of everything. Maybe just because you have access to that doesn't make you a better person or more valuable to society, which leads to, when you think about it in a D&D setting, why is it that we have this proliferation of magic? And if we do, why is it that the world still is plagued by so many troubles? We have forests full of dark creatures. We have monsters in the deeps. We have all sorts of issues that could be fixed by these casters, yet they're still there.
I think that question, it reminds me of the Fermi paradox, right? Like, we should see these problems solved, but we don't. We should see these super high level casters, but we don't. And I think in a world where immortality exists, right, you have these several different ways of attaining, limited immortality. The risks when you're immortal, right? Every small risk becomes an infinite risk.
Mm-hmm.
So the journey to immortality is, in and of itself, I think, going to largely end in seclusion. Once you get access to a demiplane, what is worth taking a risk of your own immortality to leave your own little pocket plane where all of your needs are met and you can continue to vibe? What would have to happen in the mortal coil to justify that risk? Do you care that there's a forest threatening just normal people? Probably not enough to justify risking literal infinite life, right? And you could even argue from a utilitarian perspective that it's not worth it. You have more life years ahead of you than that entire village in perpetuity. And then you have the aspect of, if you're an immortal nth level caster with all this magic, are you going to wittingly allow other people to approach your power level? Is it like a filter situation where the second you become a 7th level caster, some nth level caster comes out and just smites you?
I think that's actually an excellent question, and that raises, in my mind at least, the idea of why the gods are still there and why they exist. Is that almost part of what's happening? Are we getting to those high level casters, and the gods are effectively regulating the market, as it were, to make sure that those individuals are either distracted, off on their own plane somewhere, or just no longer available in standard society?
Well, I think you have to look at it as any power, whether it be magic power or political power or some other, like in a superhero context, superpowers. It's all the same in the sense that you see the same kind of themes of power canceling out, power forming hierarchies, things like that. So, like for every uh, generous philanthropist, there's a selfish capitalist or whatever, and that could that translate equally to for every 20th level cleric, there's evil necromancer. And because when you have, if you look at some of the more modern, more honest superhero shows, you realize that like power corrupts, and people with power aren't always obligated to use it to help people. They generally use it to help themselves. So yeah, I'm just thinking of like The Boys, where the best superheroes in the world really just care about themselves and proliferating their own power, whether that be harming others in power or making political moves. But that rarely goes down to like solving human world problems.
Yeah. Ice again makes another comment in the No Mic chat, which is actually quite interesting here. A theoretical analogy could be the immensely wealthy individuals in our society. So if we think about that, and we think about even individuals who aren't part of corporations, a significant number of them we never hear anything about. Now, a lot of them could be, as you say, philanthropists, quite helpful, but most of the time when we're hearing about them, it's kind of in a negative light, because it used to be that the overall feeling was that if you wanted to be someone who was extremely wealthy and wanted to be looked at and well known and well thought of, you'd go about building universities and hospital wings and doing things that would benefit society on a broad scale so that the vast majority of people would know your name. Whereas as we've gone further and further into this kind of corporate idea of our reality, you don't see that nearly as often. And when you do, it's usually commercialized in some way.
I feel like we talk about that, you know, in terms of becoming immensely wealthy in our society, right? There's like a selection bias. I will never be immensely wealthy because if I got to $1 million, I would stop accruing wealth, or whatever that number is, 5 million, 10 million. Like I'm never hitting $1 billion because I will stop doing anything to gain more money long before that. I don't have that kind of mentality. I think you're going to see a similar thing in the magic world. Most people would never pursue 9th level magic. They'd get to something, they'd settle down, they'd find a nice, happy place where, you know, their needs are met, they're taken care of, they can protect the people they care about, you know, and they're fine. So I guess the question becomes, what sort of people are going to pursue the outside boundary of magic? Is it going to be a philanthropist? I do feel like on an infinite timescale, right, immortality-wise, people who are inherently selfish, greedy, the people that we typically associate with wealth and political power in our world, being able to have all the things that rich people want, all of the influence, all of the material wealth, without limit, right? You have no time limit on it once you've achieved clone or whatever. Why would I feel like those are the people who are actually less likely to take that power and impact the world with it, because they're selfish. They're going to go live in their own little, they might have their servants or their undead or whatever they're doing in their own little demi-plane, their own little kingdom, their subterranean self-sustaining bunker, whatever it is they're doing. Whereas your philanthropist might actually be willing to risk his entire infinite lifespan to help people. So would you see an almost flip of of what we typically think of as the negative selection bias of power and wealth?
What I love from that idea and statement, Reggie, is that you've literally answered to me, why is it that we have so many innkeepers and tavern owners and guys who own a farm that just happen to be mid-level powerful? And it's literally, as you said, the people have gathered enough wealth or power to be able to go and do what they want to do for the rest of their life and not be bothered by anybody, the cops or otherwise. I love that answers that. Thank you.
I also have something to add because we've been kind of hitting on the idea of this for a while with all of these wonderful ideas that you guys are having. In a lot of the settings that there are, we see that there was at one point in the lore a point of mass hubris where these wizards that, as you point out, are going to keep, the ones that do keep pushing, the ones that do keep pushing for power, the ones that do achieve these high levels, usually they believe that they are justified in their own actions for whatever it is that they are chasing. We see this in Forgotten Realms lore with the rise and fall of the Nethril. We see this in in the Critical Role lore with the fall of Aeor and the Calamity and everything. This is it's a common theme that runs throughout it, and it does somewhat explain, how is it that there are all these relics, all these dungeons, all these whatever, through the past, and why that there isn't these things nowadays is because there was this massive amount of ego that caused something absolutely terrible to happen. I mean, in Forgotten Realms lore specifically, you see the fall of Netheril quite literally with their floating cities because of the fact that one such wizard, archmage that was in charge of the city, had the hubris to believe that he could accomplish more and better as the god of magic than the actual god of magic. And I think that you're right, and this does lead it to this. But I do want to throw a little monkey wrench into your theory there, Reggie, because we've seen also another reason for the massive armament of power. And that is when there is a war, especially a Cold War, that goes on. If there are already decided factions and neither side can act, how else do you spend your time, your money, your resources, but to further attempt to put yourself above the others?
I mean, you need to arm the standard citizenry who can't access magic. We have the fighter class for a reason, and it's so it can wield that shiny MacGuffin the wizard happened to have made for him and go and stab the other wizard in the face while hopefully surviving the fireball that's coming his way.
So, since we're talking about building a high magic society, I'm going to point out that when you're building it, you kind of want to decide how optimistic you want to be about it, because you could build a world with all these reclusive ninth level people hoarding magic and huge hubris. You could also build a highly military world where every military academy teaches soldiers how to shoot a firebolt and then sends them into the field. And you could also build a more industrial society where you have guilds of casters who work together to achieve something and learn or whatever, create. And it really comes down to what society you want to build, and because all those societies are viable and can be seen in different parts of different kinds of lore.
You almost have to make an additional distinction besides high-low magic, right? It's like I'm imagining it as broad versus tall magic. the ubiquity therein. Not how much magic total, because if it's concentrated in the hands of 15 people, it might still in many ways feel like a low magic setting. But like, how many people out of 100 have some capacity for magic? They know some cantrips, they know some spells. That's another variable on the high-low magic spectrum.
There's also an idea that I'd love to steal from 40K, the idea of the null, the person who is born who can't be affected by magic, and how that would be viewed in a society where magic exists and is proliferated. Are they pariahs, or are they handy assassins? Are they the norm, or are they controlled in some way because we don't want them to breed through society and cut off magic in family lines?
Okay, just plugging it because I'm just a huge nerd. Essentially, what you are describing there, Voss, is the anime of Black Clover. Which,
Seen it, loved it.
yeah, for those that aren't familiar with it, Black Clover is a kind of a D&D world in a way, where most individuals have some capacity for magic. It's actually a high magic society, as I would define it. When I say high magic, you're right, Reggie, be more specific with what I'm referring to. When I say high magic, I mean more the high abundance of magic, as in the ability to gain access. And back to the anime, just to reference it, it is a wonderful setup with lots of lore that's being built into it as the anime goes along. But almost everyone in there has access to magic of some sort. And it is very much a classist system wherein the people that have the most powerful magics end up determining how the world goes. And into it, you have one of your main protagonists, Asta, who has zero ability to do any magic whatsoever, but then somehow gains the ability to create a sword which can dispel magic, which has not really been seen in that world before. And he literally just cuts through everything, and no one has any idea how to deal with him as a person.
He is the epitome of the muscle wizard. He has one spell, it is counterspell and anti-magic, and he uses it with these big old muscles to jam it down the throats of other wizards. It's fantastic.
I heard an even better description of it recently, where it's kind of like a bunch of people came in to play Magic the Gathering, and everyone has their own version of Magic. So everyone has like, oh, they're playing a mono white deck, or they're playing a blue black deck, or whatever it is. And then Asta is the kid that comes in without a magic deck, but a pair of scissors, and everyone else is playing by the rules, and Asta's just like, I'm gonna cut up your cards now.
He gets thrown out of that tournament immediately. But yes.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, so
right.
It is actually something that you and I discussed recently, Voss, the idea of going back to something I said before. How is it that magic is going to be interpreted in that world? Is there a counter to it? Is a very big decision that you need to make, because we see this in a lot of the settings of, if magic is in high abundance and high tier magic is something that is accessible, then is there a counter to that, and what would happen if there is a counter to that? One of the things I proposed.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, one of the things I was proposing to Voss the other day was, if it was going to be a high abundance magic world, then one of the things that you would need would be some type of anti-magic artifact or material that would allow for your martial classes to actually be useful. Something that would dim the effects, that would take away from, oh, now there's 5 fireballs coming from that squad that's just up the road there. And if you're a marshal, there's no way to get around it. There's nothing that can really, do anything unless there is this type of material that could reduce magical damage that was coming into you.
And with that specifically, like counter magic, I feel like the one thing that 5e is missing in a world building, or one of the things that 5e is missing in a world building domain, is how would a kingdom protect itself from teleportation magic? Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of a spell that would effectively, in any meaningful way. Is that the one?
Yes, that's spell. Yeah, that's what it does.
Sorry, say that spell again.
I probably pronounced it wrong, but it's like forbiddance or forebodance or something.
40,000 square feet of floor space to a height of 30 feet above the floor. Creatures can't teleport into or out of the area or use portals. So, like, that certainly covers a decent. But I love
not at 1,000 gold pieces per day. It doesn't.
Well, once you cast it
every day for 30 days.
30,000 gold per 40,000 square foot.
This is something you cast on like your palace,
but it only goes up to 30 feet above the floor, and I really see no provision for extending beyond that, unless you just have to build more floors and then do every 30 feet you have to put a new floor and then cast it again. So they can just teleport above you and then feather fall. Like that seems like such a stupid oversight. But,
and reality-wise, it means that without those sort of abilities to hold off a magic user, much in the same way that a single individual who wants to assassinate a president might do, there is with casters that same danger that any one individual or any one body that is running a country could easily be crippled or manipulated in some way by the magical casters.
And then just to put it into context, 40,000 square feet is about 2.3 acres. So it's not like in terms of a kingdom, I mean, you're going to need a lot of these. Regardless, even the most wealthy kingdom, you're going to be able to teleport to right outside their farms or whatever. Like they're not going to be able to
telling your peasants that we're spending 30,000 gold just to cast Forbiddance 30 days in a row, rather than trying to feed the populace. Do you know the level of industry and earnings you'd have to have in your country to have that sort of money just lying around in your treasury? And if do, what wizard or cleric isn't going to be tempted to be like, yeah, no, I cast it today and just pocket 1,000 gold?
Teleport's much cheaper, I think is the point.
Well, teleport is not cheap. If you want to teleport like an army into somewhere, you're going to want either teleportation circles, which are super expensive, or gate, which is super high level. And even then, both of those are going to teleport like a squad, not an army.
But you've got to remember, in the setting we're playing in, we don't send armies to take down countries. We send a party of 5 guys who happen to have a bunch of skills and go, hey, that king over there took, such and such's shiny crown or goblet, and then we just let these maniacs who seem to have the greatest luck in collecting all sorts of gear free and clear in some other country and go, boy, I hope they don't kill a bunch of the civilians in the meanwhile. And then we end up with murder hobos.
Well, I want to bring that up because in a high magic setting where you expect people to, you expect a decent amount of people to have magic, even something from firebolt to fireball, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You could just as easily expect that the city guards will have equally encounter magic. Like, I don't know if it's a D&D item, but Dimeridium handcuffs from Witcher. That seems like something every guard would have. Just handcuffs that can't, when you put them on a magic user, it cancels that magic.
Yeah, and I suppose a really interesting thing is, why do we have so many adventure parties? If you've got someone who's got these sort of skills and isn't having serious personal issues, why is the city not going, hey, we're going to put you on retainer. You come live here. You'll get a house for free. You only have to work a few months every year. And all we want you to do is anytime something big and dangerous turns up, you go kill it.
Well, I think that's the selection bias. That's just another layer of it, right? Like you look at the Wild West, there were some people who took a very similar skill set and became sheriffs, and there are
Yes,
other
absolutely.
people who took a skill set that's similar to sheriff and became cowboys, and some that became just absolute outlaws. You know, the same capacity that is applied in different ways depending on your headspace. There are some people who would simply never become adventurers, no matter how proficient they were with a bow or a wand or what have you. And there are some people who, I'm sure, countless hordes have wandered off with a sword and died immediately in a goblin ambush. You know, it's the call of glory. Some
Yeah,
answer it, and some do not.
That I suppose that's the other question as well. We've got all these little adventurers and wannabe adventurers who go out and attack things, and they always go after the little evil guy first. We've got the goblins, we've got the kobolds, we've got the classic, we're going into the wolves, you're going to fight a dire wolf. These guys are hunting down and dealing with adventurers on a day-to-day basis, we assume. So why have we run into some sort of alpha goblin who's level 10 and is just like, I'm sick of these adventurers, I'm going to go and deal with this nearby town and then just take over so we can stop being bothered by all these wannabes with a sharp, shiny sword or a bow?
I mean, that sounds like a great plot hook. Like that sounds like a lot of fun.
On that note, if you ever run into a solitary kobold, always run the other way. Doesn't matter what. Doesn't matter
If
who
he's
it is.
alive alone.
In net, you always run away from the solitary kobold. No, it's not because they're
I'm
not
just
alone. It's
imagining.
because of pun.
No, it's the kobold who's taken levels in Bard and Rogue and gone on that double proficiency on Bluff. And it's just like, yeah, no, I'm a lone kobold. You should be afraid. Think about it for a second.
Yeah.
But it's only like level 4.
No,
Are you kidding me? It would be insane for me to be out here alone. There's absolutely no way that obviously this is an ambush, and then that's just how he lives through every encounter. That's pretty good.
I like it.
But the thing that I'm actually referencing is back in 3.5 times, there was an internet meme of a kobold that went around because someone decided to actually put a kobold and like give them ranks and class and everything, and it effectively became a god kobold. And
Well, it was like there was a magic item. It was an exploit. You can get like infinite wishes or something. Basically, I forget the details, but he was an infinitely scaling build through chicanery.
yeah,
One
let's
thing-
see. Nope, not that one.
One thing I would love to see why Ark looks that up is the idea of a magical society where magic, rather than being some endless font, is actually a individual limited unit. So the idea that if there's a 9th level caster out there who has the 7 first level spells and the 6 second levels and so on and so forth, they've actually hoarded up a resource, meaning there's less first level casters in the world. The idea that someone out there has to go and kill that 9th level caster to free up a bunch of magic so that more casters can kind of grow is intriguing to me.
And you're definitely going to end up with a magic holocaust. Like that's an inevitable outcropping of that.
Another thing I thought of earlier is how everything that we were talking about, like we were talking about like the fear that would be placed on certain types of spellcasters and everything, and have like the witch hunts and everything. That basically sounds like the story, part of the storyline from the Dragon Age series, where you have the Templars going and hunting down at these spellcasters that could summon the demons and everything.
Blood mages.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the imprecision of what we're talking about comes in. I mean, you're never going to... We'll never know. We can't possibly be right. There's no right answer here. Could you take this same premise of what does a high magic setting that you really think about? You actually consider the implications of the spells that are available. What does that look like? Yeah, you could absolutely go that way. Spellcasters are hunted, they're outlawed, they're banned. You could go the everyone's got magic and everyone's cool with it way, and it's a utopia. You could go the mageocracy is the predominant form of government, and every kingdom has a mage king. Like, you know, there's infinitely many ways to permute it, and I think that's part of the fun of it.
I suppose my question is this. If we have a high magic society that is that broad base, where there's lots of people who can access magic, is there a class of mage that generally just outnumbers the rest? We all look at the wizard and point at the wizard as the idea of, yeah, that's where magic is. But in reality, as we've pointed out, that's the equivalent of the college education. That's the years of study to learn how to be a caster. Do we end up in a society where there's more warlocks than there are wizards?
Well,
I was going to say, well, wouldn't it be more towards the sorcerer side at that point, where since it's a high magic society and just about everybody has access to magic, sorcerers are born, just with the ability to use that magic anyways, whether it be at least in D&D from one parent, such as a dragon or something else, but it's in their blood, so everybody's born in that society with the ability to use magic like a sorcerer instead of having to get it from a whatever like a warlock would.
Well, that's going to be cultural. You're going to have wealth is going to dictate that. So if in this kingdom, bards are the people who have the best outcomes, are the people who get the coolest jobs, are the people who get all the ladies, whatever it is that society values. If it values bardhood above all the others, then all the rich people are going to send their kids to bard college. If sorcery, if having an innate magic predisposition is the thing that culture envies and desires, then rich people are going to pay to have like surrogates that are grandchildren of whatever's going to give you a sorcerer lineage. They're going to just use money or influence or power to make that happen. The same is true as wizardry. I could even see it with warlock. In certain kingdoms, oh yes, pact magic is the epitome. It's the thing we all love and cherish, and as such, there are these parents who basically pay demons to come by. Like they've had some guy capture a demon so that they can get packs for all their children,
We're going to end up with the sort of society like with the Harry Potter universe, that there are the air quote pure blood families. And then we've got all the mixed bloods and the muggle-borns who are just getting by because, grandma happened to cheat on grandpa one time, and that's how I got my angel blood.
Yeah, family predispositions. Oh, we're a wizarding family. That's what we do. Oh, yeah, we have a demon in the basement, so we all just do warlock stuff because that's, we have a demon in the basement. So
I love the idea in real world that the warlocks predominantly live in South America because in South America they have the rest throughout the day, and it just makes the day better.
Oh, that's why siestas exist. Yeah, sure. There you go.
Siestas exist because short rests are important.
That makes sense, man. It's like 2 hours on, 1 hour off. You have a slower pace of living.
I like that. Also means that warlocks gave us tacos, so I'm good with that.
Now, canonically, I believe that's wizards.
Would you like to hear Pun Pun? Since I have him looked up.
Sure thing.
So Pun Pun was originally a joke, and in order to obtain it, it required 12 level to give 12 levels to a kobold. Although this one person, thanks to the way that 3.5 progressed, apparently you can effectively make him with simply 5 levels. But effectively, Pun Pun was a manipulation of the rules such that you had a kobold with the ability to, as this one person describes it, the ability to gain an infinite amount of everything except 4 levels and XP, but including divine rank, which makes you a god. Apparently, the main way of doing this was the kobold took a level in divine minion, then wild shaped into something called a Saruk, which had the ability to summon a familiar, which was a viper, which had the ability to grant an ability to and let's see. Pun Pun wild shapes into a Saruk and uses the assumed supernatural ability Savage Species to use the Manipulate Form ability. He uses Manipulate Form to bestow the very same ability, Manipulate Form, to his Viper familiar. Pun Pun dismisses his Saruk form and orders the familiar to grant him the Manipulate Form ability using the Manipulate Form, of course. Since Pun Pun is a pathetic kobold, he qualifies as a scaled one. Though human or other creature could simply wild shape into a form to qualify as a scaled one, Pun Pun now has the strongest ability in the game, which keeps giving him strength score going up permanently to a maximum of 36. Not a size bonus. This is just like straight up. This is just him gaining strength, and it just keeps going up higher and higher until you get Pun Pun strength to be over 100.
This sounds like the biological equivalent of one of those machines where the hammer knocks the marble that rolls down the hill that hits the domino.
Yeah,
So-
it's a whole thing. Someone had way too much time on their hands and came up with that.
Panic has posted up a comment which is actually really intriguing and actually almost echoes an idea they have in Pathfinder. The idea of a kingdom where the king is the patron of a class of warlock aristocrats. So, from Pathfinder, for those who know it, first edition, there was the idea of the leadership feat, the idea of you being a high enough level that you would get a bunch of followers, and those followers would have set levels to follow after you. And the mythic variant of that, which allowed for you, if you were a cleric, to actually become effectively your own follower's deity, granting them levels in caster powers for cleric levels. Which I think is really interesting, right up to the point when someone kills that king and your entire aristocracy's power goes away.
Or does it? Is kind of a question.
I mean, if you're capable of patronizing, I don't even know if that's the right. I don't think you can do that. A bunch of warlocks, you're gonna be tough to take down. And then there's the question of, are the other people who can serve as patrons going to be jazzed about you doing that? And well, yeah, I think that's one of the hard things. I think we tend to play high magic, low theology settings, and theology. You know, how you incorporate your gods into your world is going to have just as much impact as how you incorporate magic into it.
It's why every time I'm at home setting, I often just have the gods have been severed from this mortal plane. They can still affect things, but they can't directly communicate to you unless you're very rarely in the right spot at the right time. They expend a lot of power to do it, or you're a high-level caster casting you once per week. I roll a d20 to see whether the god wants to tell me something today.
I think the other one people do all the time is the gods are just kind of in balance, right? Like that's why, because it's almost like you have the problem of evil, but it's more complicated because there's just a whole bunch of gods. Like, why are we allowing these liches to lay waste to kingdoms when there's a god of basically not letting the undead do that, like right over there? If he's like right over there, why isn't he taking care of this stuff? And so I think that's why people just typically hand wave the theology away from it. But you can do it other ways.
Do the Imperial Guard version. You send in one of your paladins, and then he says, "Fire on my target," and just hug the lich, and then let the god do that business.
Orbital lasers.
To throw another kind of perspective in this, there's also like ancient dragons out there, and all these other super powerful creatures that are capable of arcane things. So they would probably have an impact as well on how society develops their magic and how they interact with one another. Especially if a dragon like claims a kingdom to protect, or claims them as their not sovereign, but makes them pay taxes and whatever to the dragon for protection. That would probably impact it as well.
A dragonocracy.
I mean, you think about it. We've got effectively what we would call these forerunner species with dragons, with the Fae, even in some small elements with some of the elves, which just came before the idea, at least majority-wise, of a founded society of humanity, of orcs and of all the rest of us. We've got to ask ourselves how much of their society has been passed down and then adopted by those who followed.
Yeah, it's one of those things you almost have to suspend your disbelief to even get to the idea of a humanoid civilization. Like the idea that we could even cobble together a kingdom with dragons and trolls and beholders and all this bullcrap roaming around. Like, how did we even do that? And so that's one of your world building things. Is like, perhaps that's a huge thing in this world, is the founding of a kingdom. It's very rare, and it only happens when a benevolent entity becomes powerful enough to stake a claim in a very dangerous world. And perhaps borders are inherently dramatically less clear cut in this reality because space isn't so much at a premium. We have ways of sustaining populations outside of simple agriculture. Because I think agriculture is one of those huge driving forces. It's a little boring. It's a little dry to think about, oh, well, where do we get our corn? That's not what people want to spend time on. But it's a very important question, and it's driven much of our development as a species. So you have to, assume that.
I love the idea of this wonderfully powerful 20th level wizard who's a corn mage. And that's how he's maintained his power.
Like how did this kingdom become an independent nation? Well, this guy was really good at growing corn, and he used that trade power to stake a claim, so to speak. He used his corn money to build a kingdom. Like, yeah, you could do.
Isn't that literally druids? I know when I played a druid in a campaign where everyone was punched. The shadow fell. There was a bunch of issues, but like we came to a town, and they were having issues with like their plants dying, and people were starving. So me as a druid, I think there's another one druid, just like spent the day casting. There's a druid spell, I forget what it's called, but that brings plants to life, and just like imbue the field with life and give them food. And I feel like that's kind of like the role of druids, and they just do that.
And then you also, how often is it that a druid is going to find the plight of a civilization endearing? I mean, I feel like it would be equally common for a druid to look at any form of kingdom and be like, hey, screw you guys. Like,
actually, I'll be honest, that actually answers for me the idea of why do we keep having these horribly dark, overgrown forests and everything everywhere. That's the druids, for lack of a better term, kingdom. That's them reinforcing their borders and keeping society and civilization back.
Although
we've got these horrifying monsters, but to the druids, that's just a somewhat occasionally nice bear,
Although you do get the alternative version of druids if you consider Eberron lore, because you have in Eberron there is the Dargon Marshes. I'm probably messing up that name. It's something Marshes. But out there you have this circle of druids whose job is actually kind of similar to the subclass of the ancestral protectors, paladins, and their job is basically to make sure that outsiders, all these aberrations and everything don't come into our universe. And so that would actually be a reason as to why they would actually work with a kingdom, potentially, if you want to work something like that in to your home world. I always found that really interesting.
We've got the idea of the multiverse there, where the other side of that veil is filled with Cthulhu-esque sort of monsters and monstrosities. That is just the epiphany and going to get against the idea of life as we know it for our standard plane. So I suppose the question is, if we've got these different types of magic and these different influences, we've got the bought-in value from gods, from nature deities, from the Fae, from our forerunner races like the elves. How much credence do you give each of those different elements all running together?
Yeah, I mean, it's once you decide what powers you want to have involved in your game. I mean, you are always free to like what Voss said a little while before, cut out by some means something that you don't want in your world. Various large creators have done this before. The Eberron campaign setting has very little connectivity with its own gods. They rely more upon draconic prophecy. And you look over at Critical Role. Matt Mercer actually said that he was suffering with the same question that we were before of, why doesn't the gods just come in and, just stop any of the bad things that are going on? And so he ended up going and creating the, I forgot what he called it, the whole situation.
Divine Gate.
What was it? Sorry.
Is the Divine Gate?
Yeah, the Divine Gate, but he had a word for that whole schism of sorts where the gods were shunted off. The Divine Gate was his mechanism for it. I feel like it began with a D, but I could be wrong.
I think one of the interesting ideas that I've seen elsewhere is from the author Sanderson, where the idea that there is the duality of each of the gods requiring a balance and requiring them to basically keep out of mortal affairs. We have in his system a moment where a mortal is kind of shown the grand scale of what the gods are dealing with. And we have this image where they go, why haven't you been helping me? Why haven't you given me the tools I need to be able to stop the bad people from doing the bad things? And the god effectively says, I'm trying, I'm doing everything I can, but I've got other things I need to do. That's why I sent you. And then he shows him this image of his planet and this red miasma pushing in from every side. And his god that he's been complaining and asking more of has been spending vast majority and vast amounts of energy to hold back that darkness. The idea that there is, as you get to those higher levels, just significantly more grander things and more powerful things you have to deal with that is just beyond the idea of mortal comprehension, I think is a really great way to remove some of those higher level casters and the godlike beings like liches and dragons and fae. Yeah, Brandon Sanderson, that's the guy. Great amount of stories. Really annoyed there's no more audiobooks for me to listen to.
I think at this point, like kind of the point that we've made is you can build almost any world that you're really trying to do in a way that is cohesive and has verisimilitude and makes sense to both you as the author and the players as participants. And so for me, I think probably the easiest schema when you talk about industrializing a high fantasy world is to begin with the end in mind, so to speak. Think about what truth you want your world to flesh out, and then kind of reverse engineer the circumstances that led to that. Because doing the butterfly effect game of like, okay, well, if Revivify exists, how does that change society? That's very, very difficult. And we were joking before we started this about how the beginning to making a good, cohesive world is sequestering yourself away for 10 years to just build it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But starting with kind of, okay, I want these things to be true. I want there to be kingdoms. I want there to be vaguely this many. I want them to be this spread out or this powerful or this weak. I want villages to exist at this relative density, or I don't want any villages at all. I want most of the world to be wild and teleportation circles to be the center point of trade and commerce. Whatever you want the world to look like, start kind of with those big overarching themes, and then kind of backwardsly, in reverse, you build the things that have borne out that reality.
I tend to take two different paths when building worlds, depending on what I'm needing for the time. The first is very much what you're talking about. I go for that grand scheme and then fill in the details as I need them, if players happen to ask the question, which, let's be honest, players mostly don't. And then you've got that one player who's just like, I would like the encyclopedia of your world, please. You're just like, damn it, I didn't write that. The other thing I like to do, which is quite fun, is to start on the very small scale. I take a single village and then I go to myself, all right, what are the rules of my world? How would that affect this village? And then I build out from there. I go, okay, so there's a village here. What's down that road? How many roads come out from this village? Where do they lead to? And then I build the world out from that center point. There's literally, almost literally, a center of the world and a village that started there that allows me to build the rest of the world from.
For me, with my little home project of building up the tower, it really started and continues to be something where I don't really know where I want to go with it, like how Reggie was suggesting it. I start with a singular kind of event or question, a what if question, and then deviate from there. Uh, because just for example, the first floor of the tower was, what if when the spell plague happened, that one of the towns that supposedly burnt to death in the south of the Forgotten Realms in Halura, what if they actually survived but were just trapped away from everything? And everything else kind of just evolved out of that one, that singular idea. And so, if you don't have a direction that you want to go in with what truth you want to show, I mean, it's always really good if you have that, but you don't necessarily need to have that in order to make a kind of interesting little setting. You can just ask the one little what if and deviate off of something that's already there.
And I must admit, even just working with the one-on-one with you, Ark, when I was helping create a floor for the tower, I had an amazing time working in a team, because there's something about having other individuals who understand the rules of the environment that you can bounce things off of and mutate to make new ideas that sparks something inside of a DM to create a world which is so much more intriguing than you can make alone.
Oh yeah, and definitely feel free to ask your players to build a section. You don't have to like expressly ask them to like make something, but you can ask them the question of what type of, story element do you want? And when they give you ideas, you can just take those and run with them and end up, creating something that's kind of cool and fun and interesting and complex because you've worked together. The maybe, your one what if, but you've worked in aspects that they've wondered about. Let's say that one of them wants to panic, run a good necromancer or something. I'm convinced that was probably the starting for the setting in the Eberron setting of Karnath, wherein necromancy is just, commonplace. In fact, it actually becomes an expectation in that nation of Karnath inside of the Eberron setting, where you just, okay, you've served your country. Now, once you're dead, you're gonna serve it again. I mean, and it's like just like your patriotic duty to donate your body to the nation so that it can get different things done, so that it can provide for the common defense. Let your players in and help create part of the world, because that will also contribute to the buy-in to trying to wanting to play in the system.
I mean, we've seen the meme online of the classic DM who sits there listening in on his players, and they say, "We've got this wonderful idea of what the DM's planning. Here's his sneaky plan. We've all worked it out." And us as DMs are sitting there going, "All right, this was my 2-page thing, but your 2-page thing is amazing." So yeah, you guys caught me. Absolutely. Can we look at that 2 pages for a second?
So, since we're talking about like world building, I think you could approach it from both sides. It is perfectly fine to just build like, one town or one neighborhood, just where the initial party is going to start and be, and then build out from there. It's also completely fine and to build the whole world and start building inwards. It's so you don't have to feel overwhelmed to build, like figure out how every single thing in this society works in order to start playing. You could totally just figure out how the initial setting will that the player started and works and play along.
A great way to think of that is like as a puzzle. You can start with the borders and fill in the rest of the picture, but it's perfectly reasonable just to put together the pieces that make the little central picture and just leave it at that until somebody asks about the rest of the picture.
Yeah, I just want to bring that up because we've been talking very, very high level, like, oh, how does the political systems work? How do the magic work in society? But you really don't need half to think about those things when building a campaign. Because that could be very daunting for a new DM. And I just want to point out for new DMs that you don't need to do that. It could be fun, and if the campaign is long running, you could eventually build to that scope. But if you don't need that scope to start off.
And the really important thing as well, if you're a new DM and you have spent that time building all of your extra resources, supplement that out by putting it into smaller sections. And then if your players haven't asked about it and you've only used that one town, but you've built a city and a whole country, feel absolutely free to repurpose that in the next campaign. Because even though you as a DM know that you built that for one, trust me, the players will love it because of the level of detail and involvement you've got. You can easily transplant a lot of the resources you've done for one to another.
Also, it's always nice, especially if you're a new DM, and you have new players potentially. You could be just like to make sure that they don't feel overwhelmed. Make it so that your starting town, your one thing is kind of isolated from everything else. That way, you don't have to go crazy, and you can just figure out where you want this to go, and then all of a sudden that little world lets in this one little sliver of light from the outside, and all of a sudden you're now in a much bigger world, and that's a wonderful moment to allow players to experience of, oh wow, there's something that's much bigger out there, and we can go and discover that. And it doesn't have to be anything immediate, just like Panic and Boss were talking about. Like, just starting from that one little thing can make it so that D&D is actually much more accessible in the beginning. It's one of the reasons why Eberron is actually a kind of daunting setting, in my opinion, because there is just so much that's built into that setting that is actually integral to everything that's going on in that setting. And it makes it very, very untouchable to new players because of that.
One of the big things I've seen a lot of DMs do, new DMs, as a mistake, is to forget that history often gets erased or kind of warped over time. If we look at modern day society, we've got records for the last 100, 200, 300 years, but most of the stuff going further back than that, we're practically guessing. We have the NPCs where the players go in and go, hey, how do I find this? And our initial feeling as a DM is to have the NPC provide that information. But if you think about your local society, most of the people, unless they have a special interest in something, won't really know about it. If I'm not a sports fan, I'm not going to know where the local kind of sports are played or what the rules are for them. If I'm not interested in the idea of trade, I won't know which cities are best connected to go along the path to get your fancy grain. Feel free to say I don't know to your players, or to make up things which are not necessarily correct, because people lie.
And are dumb.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's there's a lot of layers to that.
Yeah, there's a bit of a fine line with that, and it kind of goes to like the writing principle of a talking head, where you as a DM sometimes feel compelled to give all this exposition of your world because you built it, but like a local like tavern owner or a person you stop on the street might not know it, so you kind of have to balance of finding a way to get the information you want to give, but having the opportunity to obfuscate information that you don't need to know, that you don't want the party to know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like the Chekhov's gun thing, right? Like it's just the stuff that's going to actually come up in the vague to near future, or at least that you hope might come up. You don't need everything all the time.
There's a bit of
the
a
players don't need to know.
There's a bit of a disclaimer, that kind of stuff, because like you could lie, and it's very reasonable to expect that an NPC could lie. However, as a DM, your players kind of trust you to not lie, I guess.
I mean,
and
I would lay down the kind of hints that the NPC in question may not be the most knowledgeable, and I would make it clear up front to the players that there is those sort of layers in the society I'm building. But I do love the idea of the talking head. It reminds me of the scene from Hot Fuzz, where the officer goes in and there's the lovely lady who runs the gardening shop who just happens to know everything that's going on in town and everything they happen to need to know. There's always that opportunity when your players are just refusing to follow the storyline to put down an NPC who's just like, here's everything you need to know wrapped up in a neat package. The enemy is over that way. Follow that road there. And we're going to get this game on the road.
Yeah, so like
not even in a railroading sense, but the campaign's running the risk of turning into like, they've decided they want to make glass sculptures. Like that's going to be their next. So you got to get them back into the questing thing.
The barbarian baker, yes.
Yeah, you got to watch out for that.
Yeah. So that's kind of like a writing tool that you wouldn't expect. You don't go from it. You don't approach it from the side of what would a normal person know and say. You approach it from the writing side of how do I progress the plot, because when it comes down to it, both the players and the DM enjoy when the plot progresses, even if they have to do something that seems forceful, like have an NPC just say the exposition.
We all want to get to the end of the rainbow and find that pot of gold, but I think we've maybe gone a little into the grass or taken the train off the tracks here for Arc. You might have to rename this first section.
Hey, I don't care if we keep it, strictly on the rails. I'm never one to be that type of DM that, get back on task. No. There's just
train of thought derailed. There were no survivors.
That's okay. Well, I mean, if we do want a question to kind of get back on task, we talked a lot about the high magicking aspect. Do any of you have any suggestions that would be pertinent to more of a, what if they want to make it more steampunky? What are your thoughts on that?
I am an enormous fan, especially when it comes to players that want to play something that isn't in the handbook, right? Like I want to do this thing that really isn't reflected anywhere in any of the many, many books that we now have. I'm a huge fan of reflavoring. Like you can take a warlock and turn it into just about anything someone might want to play with relative ease. It's like, I want to use drones. Okay, cool. We're gonna call Eldritch Blast Drone Strike, and we're gonna call it a day. Like we're done. We're done in one. That's my first line of defense against trying to do things that the system wasn't built for.
Law-wise, my issue with steampunk stuff, and I say issue in a broad sense, is that every time I think of steampunk, I think of the Industrial Revolution and what that did to the idea in England. The way society changed, the amount of jobs that were destroyed, the amount of new jobs that were made, and the way that society viewed the labor force there. What that would do for not only the people that live there, but for the casters, for the society, for the way that magic is viewed and used. Do we have the Chinese factory of children who are making the Apple phone, but now they're casting cantrips to create low level quality products to send out to other countries.
Oh man.
I mean, I think, if you have a decent grasp of how the Industrial Revolution played out, I mean, you can certainly look at something like that to draw from. But it's one of those butterfly effect things where I feel like there's absolutely no reason that a high fantasy setting would have to go the same basic route. It could manifest in a completely different way. You could have a techno aristocracy that hoards the knowledge and the technology to themselves. I think the question you have to answer first, if you're going to try to add steampunk components, is what gap are you filling with steampunk? What thing couldn't you have already done with magic? Or what thing was logistically difficult with just magic that this new level of technology is now simplifying or allowing?
I mean, the answer for a vast majority of people who want to play steampunk is guns and airships, and I fully support airships.
So
Airships are cool.
Airships are cool. So I recently have been building world building with some friends, and I do like the idea of kind of steampunk. The world isn't steampunk, but we had kind of the question of this is a post Arcana. It's kind of post-apocalyptic, but a few thousand years later, there was arcane society. Something ended it, and now this is 1,000 years later. Things are rebuilding. So there's ancient artifacts that people just don't understand. So one thing that's was really steampunk that I brought that I really liked, what I called arcane arcane steambird. It's the idea of a biplane, bi-wing plane, classic of like a steampunk era, with all these tubes of steam and giant motor, except it's powered by this huge crystal in the back of the plane. The crystal being just some arcane artifact, yet it could have done something completely different, but you're just tapping its energy to do something so simple of just heating water to produce steam to power this engine. So if you want to bring magic to steampunk, really what you need to do is use magic to create steampunk.
I actually really like that idea. I also, as you were saying that, was thinking honestly that the crystal makes the plane work, and all of that steampunky-esque stuff is like when we put a bunch of extra stuff on a car that's just to make it look pretty or make extra noises.
But I just really like the idea of this arcane artifact could have been something super powerful, but we have no clue what it does. We just tap its energy to create steam, and power this plane with steam. Like
And-
if you had wizards, the wizards probably could have made the arcane artifact actually power the plane. But we're just engineers. We made it work on steam using this arcane energy.
A big thing that draws me to the idea of steampunk as well is often the setting feels like a changing of eras. It's the Industrial Revolution changing to the modern era. So we're seeing, not necessarily always, but we're seeing the decline of that classical magical society. And we're moving to a society where magic is more broadly used by the public and by the people. So that's leading to industrialization, which is spreading the overall benefits of the magic to the majority or more of the people than you could with classic magic. So it's using magic to, as you said, make the steam engines work and that, but to, in most cases, benefit more people.
I think that some of these... Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say some of these questions of that I always drift towards of why do we even have any of this stuff. I think one of the best ways that I fight with myself, I go back and forth with the idea of you don't even need to answer these questions. Let your players have a visual image of what's happening that may be different from your own. I remember reading something a long time ago about just describing a cave. There's a certain point in describing something where you go past being helpful and start to become restrictive. If I say, okay, you guys are in a large, cavernous, damp underground setting, you can get, like, you're going to conjure up a relatively decent image. It might be different from mine, but it's going to be better than if I were to spend 2.5 more minutes explaining the intricacies of the fungus and the algae. The same thing is true of cyberpunk, like of steampunk. If you just accept, hey, this is a steampunk setting, and you say, okay, you walk into a big steampunk city, they're going to have an idea of what that looks like to them, and it doesn't really matter whether it's the same as your idea until it comes into something mechanically.
Yeah, it's using the idea of preconceived notions or pre-knowledge that your players already have. If we say there's an elven city, we have an image in our minds of what that means, and a lot of the times authors will rely on that sort of information when building up a standard setting. So if you're going to go into a typical fantasy setting, most of the time they're doing exactly as you said. They're simply using those broader categories to lay down an idea and then letting you fill in all of the extra gaps, saving them a ton of work.
So if you just focus on the handful of things, or one or two ways in which your setting is saliently different from that archetype, like, oh, this is steampunk, but we have these, like Zappa said, these ancient arcane artifacts that we use to make steam. Like, that's kind of your variant. Like, it's steampunk,
exactly.
except for this one thing that's different. It's steampunk except for we have human rights. It's steampunk except for we're all on boats. You know what I mean? Steampunk, but
it's dwarves, but they're pirates. Yeah, it's that wonderful thing.
And you can get a lot of power out of that from a narrative standpoint.
Yeah, and like we're talking about magic setting, you don't have to explain why it works. And there was I think Voss has the question earlier, why why do we use Steam when we have these magic items or whatever? The answer is because that's how the setting works. You just create the steampunk setting, and then when you ask how it works, the answer is magic, because this is a magic setting.
Yeah, even in a standard setting, literally, if there was a village and the wizard there worked out how to use his magic to create steam engines, which happened to make that city more prosperous, that prosperity is going to propagate itself. Some other wizard is going to get trained by that guy or see what he's doing and go, hey, that's really cool, and do that in the village next over. And as that goes out further and further, you're going to end up with a pseudo steampunk setting because someone somewhere is going, hey, this normally works to power the windmill or to turn the thing that makes the dam full. What is? And then we're going to have something new.
My point is that you don't have to build up the history of, oh yeah, there was one guy who created the steam engine, etc. You just throw your party into a steampunk setting and be like, there's tubes in the streets, steam blowing in your face, these carts rolling on themselves without any horses, with steam shooting out their back. And you don't have to explain that this all comes back from one wizard who developed a steam engine. You could be like,
it just is.
It just is. Yeah. It's powered by magic. It's creating steam. You don't have to.
If you look at our modern society and you ask somebody, how did you get to the point where the West all looks and goes, we think democracy is best? A lot of us would be hard pressed to kind of point to the origin and go, that's why we got to this point here. We just go, it is. And we think it's best because we live here.
And there's a power to abstraction in that as well. I think we were talking earlier about, asking for directions or whatever. You might get someone who A, doesn't know, or B, lies, or like you're talking about now, why is the world like this, fellow guy who's lived in this world as long as I have? They don't know. You can ask your players, okay, is that really something you guys want to spend time on? Out of character, like, that's a valid question, but you're kind of setting up a quest now to figure out why the world is steampunk. Is that really how we want to spend this evening? And if it is, cool. Well, now we're going to do some world building. That's what we're going to do.
That's what we got to do.
But so often the answer is going to be, I was curious, but I'd really rather beat up a minotaur. Like, that's
what I love is in that world. My answer when the players say yes to that is that library is now a dungeon. So there's like librarians. The head librarian is some horrifyingly powerful demon. You can have knowledge. You just got to work for it,
And then you can abstract that too. Okay, give me a couple rolls, and then we'll figure out what you learn about and you can just give it to people too, to a certain degree. I mean, again, I'm a huge advocate for the gap between player knowledge and character knowledge. The characters should know a lot of things that players don't. Players are going to know a handful of things that characters don't.
Absolutely.
And don't, a lot of DMs make you, work for just basic world knowledge about how things. What country are we in? Oh, okay, roll history. No, I know what country I'm in because I've lived here my whole life. Just where are we, please?
Yeah, I was going to say that you have to remind your players around yourself that the characters your players are playing also live in this world, so they know the basics of this world. They're comfortable in it, and they wouldn't ask the question of why is there steam here. They would just know it and be used to it. And if the players ask, be like, "This is the world your characters grew up in. This is all they've known."
One of the things I love to do, especially if you're comfortable with your group of players, is if they're playing something unique. So if you've come to me and gone, I want to play an artificer, and I haven't really placed that around, and that's not common in my world, I'm going to ask you to fill in the gaps for me. So if something comes up, if there's a question that an artificer would know the answer to, and I haven't come up with it as a DM, I'm going to say to the player, hey, think about it for 5 minutes while I go to another player, and I'll come back to you, and you tell me why you think, for what you know of the world and what your player is in the world, how this thing came about. And that allows for kind of collaborative building of the world itself. I love that Ice is just listening in. He's just got LOL, except we have human rights. And I love that is such a rare thing that we've got to actually add to the game.
Listen, having equality is a setting-defining feature that a lot of people enjoy, and other people don't.
I love the fact that has to be the...
What's your setting? Eberron, but with equality. Like, that's, okay, all right, I'm in, let's go.
Well, I mean, if we're going to be spending so much time in this imaginary world where we get to be the heroes, why wouldn't we put in some sort of setting like just to get away from the reality of things that we have to deal with? It's like, you know what? What if we had a fantasy world, we had all this magic, we had all this cool stuff, we had this industry, but we fix this one major flaw that really bugs me about real life. And then we can kind of imagine a new lifestyle.
Everyone's nudists.
Maybe not that.
Faerun, but with income equality. Like that's I don't even think I've ever heard of someone running a campaign because wealth acquisition is such a core part of the D&D experience. But like that's another really anything you wanted to explore, you could technically do.
I mean that is a serious question about adventurers. Why are we always plundering tombs and dungeons and never returning things to the rightful owners? How many times have you as a player gone, there's a cool sword, it's got somebody's name on it, this is mine now?
Let me scratch the name out is I think most people's first instinct, just in case I run into Timothy of House Valoran or whatever.
We've got the talking intelligent sword going, excuse me, do you know where Gary is? And we're like, nah, I haven't seen Gary in a while. In you go.
73 3rd Street. No, we're not. I'm not going there.
We're not going there.
Not.
Okay, now I need.
But you could do that.
To put this into some type of campaign, or one of the tower runs or something where it's just like, you found this really cool artifact. That's mine. Oh.
Yeah, Faerun, but like archaeologists are in charge, and so things go back in the museum when they're found. Like it's there you go.
I actually had a thought the other day of a really fun little quest someone could run if they liked the idea of doing undead. It's the young person who's inherited the haunted home or whatever, but they need to stay the night there to get it. So they've hired a group of adventurers, and your adventurers literally just protect the NPC. So you're there, and it's going to get attacked by all sorts of monsters and horrible creatures and ghosts and undead. All you got to do is survive till morning. There's no long rest. There's none of that business. Just have some fun, see how you go. But what's to stop the players from just nicking the house? That's the question.
We stayed the night too. Give me.
Exactly. And I suppose that is the question, that if you have a world where we have real magic, where reincarnation and being revived from being dead thousands of years is a thing, how do we even deal with things like property ownership? I mean, the idea of some guy who's been dead for 1,000 years being revived by his church, coming back and going to a museum and going like, hey, can I have my clothes back now?
999 years. I was gonna own his crap outright in 1 year. Well, yeah, your legal system. You make I mean, who makes the rules is a very important question for any setting. And once you know who makes the rules, you can kind of infer what the rules are as needed.
The idea, again, if we go for that stolen artifact blade, the irony of stabbing the Lich with his own blade that he lost when he was a level 10 adventurer or something. Warlock archaeologist, yes, absolutely.
I'm just getting this like image of, the Lich is actually in charge of the museum, and it is a pact of the undying with their archaeologists that goes out to go collect things to put them in a museum.
And they're all his stuff. He's
He's
lived
just getting his
he's lived.
stuff back.
It's not really a museum. It's his personal belongings. I lost a pair of shoes 382 years ago. I need you to find them. They should be vaguely over there.
They have it as a museum so the public doesn't call the local cleric about the Lich who's in town. It's like, no, I'm running a museum. It's a legitimate business. Just every Sunday, I let people walk through my home. It's fine.
No.
Well, it's like you can go visit like Abraham Lincoln's old house. He wants to set up something like that, but for himself because he's not dead yet, or he's not dead twice yet.
If you want to bring in a sad element from reality, no. See, what happened was the Lich ended up leaving his house there, and then because it was left there, it was it and all the stuff within it was collected by the state. And so then it got sold off to a bunch of other people and everything, and it got lost through time. And now he just wants his stuff back. He's made a legitimate business of being a museum, and he just wants his stuff to be back in his house.
He was a hoarder in his first life. So a lot of it's not even useful. It's old newspaper clippings.
The best bit is there's a museum across the road that belongs to his ex-wife, who's also trying to collect the same thing. So they have competing groups that are going after the same artifacts.
Well, there's another layer there of I was thinking earlier about how the wealthy would have very different means of entertainment, but even like marital law and criminal justice systems would have to account for the fact that the wealthy can, till death do us part, it's really not that big of an obstacle. I can go get myself killed and brought back, and then bing, bang, boom, free divorce, or I committed triple homicide, and so I let you put me in jail and to serve 15 life sentences, and I just, okay, let's bang that out on a Tuesday.
I'm so done with you, Jenny. Walks off, jumps off cliff.
Wakes up as a clone, and we're good here. So all that has to be rebuilt from the ground up.
Yeah. Oh, man. So many.
The man who's normally fine, but his clone is actually a serial killer. All the evidence points back to the original, but
can you be held culpable for crimes a simulacrum commits?
I mean, that is the next question. It is you, isn't it? For a while, at least. Maybe they forced the original caster to cast again, thereby turning the simulacrum back to ice.
I mean, it
is.
But
you were the simulacrum all along.
There's. I have my own little theories in D&D world and everything, but the concept of what is an individual and who has souls in the D&D world has something that has recently been an interest to me. My current view is that soul in D&D world is something that has to be cultivated. I mean, in a world where you have true polymorph, something that starts out as a chair suddenly is not a chair anymore. Now it's a human. So, does that thing...
I must admit, it's intriguing, but the beautiful thing for me is being part of After Dark is I can just, if I have those questions, have something happen to a character, and then walk up like poor little orphan Annie and be like, please, sir, may I have some more? And then just bug Ark until he gives me an answer. And I'm like, thank you, and then walk off with that, which is great.
What did I do?
He's just taking solace in the idea that he doesn't have to answer those questions here.
Wow.
Exactly. I literally go, does the simulacrum have a soul? Me, made one, walks up to the keeper, who I know is effectively a speaker for Ark. Hey, keeper,
What's this? If you turn your chair into a person and they kill someone, are you responsible? I mean,
See,
these are the questions.
yeah, I've actually been dealing with this question for a while. So in my setting of the tower, I have these magically generated enemies for people to fight and everything, and they are manifestations of magic. But at the same time, some of them actually have some like degree of sentience and everything. And I had a whole lot of fun in the early days of the tower, actually. Um, Mentally torturing a druid because like there was a group of apes and he tried to save them, and but some of them the one of the people in the party just ended up going and killing the apes, and they turned into magic, and he was like, were they apes, were they alive? And that I had to keep a response, well, I mean, like, what is alive? He was as alive as you or I am. And like it just tortured that druid on the inside as
Meanwhile,
to like
every
whether or not there is a soul to
and
manifestations.
every single player on the server goes into the tower, murders them all, comes out with the shiny soul stones, and goes to the keeper and gets a brand new shiny sword or a cloak or a bag of holding.
Well, their soul lives on that way, right? So, like, my gauntlets are really a second life for so many little critters. I think it's like
All the
recycling.
critters fused into one item, and they're all
Terrible
like screaming
Cronenberg.
souls. They're all screaming souls, but we can't hear it, so it's just like, oh yes, I'm gonna use you to go murder your friends.
we need to be able to cast Awakening on the magical stones just to see what happens.
Oh dear lord, that'd be weird.
Would
Please
not.
don't. I don't want to have to figure that one out. But no,
Someone with the awakening spell should go do that.
All right, new plan. We need a high level druid.
Or just go buy a tattoo, because tattoos are stupid and let you break all the rules of the game.
They do.
Zap could
Yes.
cast Awaken once a day.
no.
What's that?
Zap could cast Awaken once a day.
Was the start?
True.
That's why he has this tree in friends.
Poor Ark.
Yeah, no.
Listen, I mean, you're the one who let people get to T4. I mean, that's on you.
Well, and the beautiful thing is if we do this properly, the next time we do this conversation, it's Ark asking the exact questions we've now asked him, as we have to work it out as a group.
Well, I mean,
It's a fractal of problems that we've created
my
for ourselves.
thought process is that in a world where things can enter and leave forms that have the ability to cognate, I believe that a soul is something that needs to be grown with experience and thought. If you are
So babies aren't people.
they're very, very weak souls, effectively. But yeah, that's effectively the way that I have thought it out. That
I
you can
actually
develop a
love
soul
that idea.
effectively. So, for example, if there is a simulacrum that starts questioning its own existence and is not just a mindless robot, if they start thinking through and making their own decisions and everything, they can actually form a soul and be potentially reincarnated. If they have, gone and become their own person, so to speak.
Tobin's going to be so pissed if you reincarnate him into something like a gnome.
You imagine you spend all that time learning magic just to get a simulacrum, and then it becomes self-aware. Some bullcrap.
Like, you're supposed to be my slave. Nope, I'm you, but plus.
Well, I mean, simulacrums aren't really just mindless robots. They're kind of just copies of you that are not in a humanoid form. So they're kind of closer to clones than mindless drones.
It's an existential crisis just waiting to happen. I mean, imagine if you were high, cast that spell, and then you're sitting there just talking to yourself about things. It's not going to end well. Like,
I mean, it requires some level of ego to cast that spell.
I mean, you think about it. You're a wizard minding your own business. You find that spell for sale at a shop. You'd be very hard pressed not to try it because you'd be like, I wonder. Like, I'm pretty awesome. To me, must be pretty freaking amazing working together. If
Well,
I'm
I
high
mean-
enough level that we can cast more than this down through a daisy chain, imagine what a team of 5 of me could do on an adventure.
I mean, most wizards are very narcissistic, so that checks out.
It does, yeah.
Anyway, is there any questions we want to answer or themes we want to hit on?
I suppose we probably should look at wrapping up potentially because we're coming up to the 2-hour mark.
Yep.
Ark, any questions that have kind of occurred to you throughout our chat now that haven't been answered, or any kind of points you want to overall make?
Not really. I think that we've answered most of the questions. Just to kind of sum up, from whatever way that you start your world and go to make your world, make your job as easy as you can on yourself. And it's always good to kind of start with one aspect, whether that is a theme, a truth, a town, or an idea, or a question. You start from that and then just grow from there, and the rest will slowly, or not so slowly, start to fall in place.
Nice. Any closing comments from you, Reggie?
I mean, I think I'm good. I think there are a handful, in the interest of thoroughness, a handful of lenses that can be helpful as well. Especially stemming off of the question element, kind of things you need to think about that are going to manifest pretty quickly once people start walking around in your world. And it's things like, how are wars fought? And that's, both a present question and also a past question. How have they been fought in the past? How are they fought now? Because if you don't have that answered, it's probably going to come up in some way, shape, or form, and you might have already limited your options just by revealing the way the world works. How do people live? How are they distributed? Is it big cities? Is it disparate villages? Is it are they hiding out in little bastions or what have you? How do they eat? Where does food come from? Is it largely coastal? Is it largely agricultural, or is it largely magic? Those are the sorts of questions that once you have your core difference maker, how is this world different from the default favored setting? Those are the things you kind of have to consider. I think it's what gives your world meat and verisimilitude. Who makes the rules? What is the role of monsters and non-humanoids? How do they fit in? What is the role of the gods? How does information spread? Are there colleges? Are there libraries? Or is everybody pretty much ignorant? And if you answer just those sort of big, central, simple questions, you're probably going to be okay with whatever your players decide to want to figure out.
Absolutely, yeah. Any comments from you, Dragon?
I accidentally slept through the first bit of this whole thing, so I don't know what was gone over for that bit that I was asleep. But with the high magic system, since D&D are actually implementing something to go along with that people have requested for a while, which would be Spelljammer, because their Spelljammer books are about to come out. As a DM, say you wanted to do a bunch of different things all in one campaign, if you also wanted to implement Spelljammer and go a little bit of sci-fi with it doesn't have to be a lot, just the ability to travel through space on a ship, which I believe the Spelljammer ships are powered by magic, then you could use those ships and that system to then go to different worlds or different universes and explore a bunch of different things all in one campaign. But that's only if you feel very confident in doing it, and if your players want to go into a bunch of different realms of possibility. And it would be, I don't know if it'd be more of an in-game thing to do, because I wasn't around when the original Spelljammer came out for D&D, but it's always been something that since I started playing has interested me. And that's the fact that, they had a system of space travel using magic.
Absolutely. There's some really amazing settings out there, and Spelljam is just one of the ones that gives us the ability to explore a aspect of a world to a greater extent. It's, I think, why we have the adventure path, for lack of a better term, books that take us through somewhere that we really want to explore, whether that be vampires versus werewolves, whether that be the idea of what is hell like, and what's it like to deal with those sort of denizens on a day-to-day basis. There are thousands upon thousands of stories and books out there that can help a budding DM to create those sort of environments and to explore them with their players. Ice, I know you were studying, but did you want to say anything before we close up?
Oh, this has been great to listen and great to get different perspectives. Been fun to learn and fun to express my opinion on the limited things I do know.
Well, the beautiful thing about not knowing anything is it's a great place to start and to do anything from. First part, what was it? The path to knowledge is ignorance, something like that. I don't know. Someone more knowledgeable will know the answer to that one. Panic, you've been a great help during this whole thing. Any closing thoughts from you?
I think the main thing when starting to DM is to not overthink it. It could be intimidating to try to create a world, but really, what you want to do is just enjoy yourself, make sure the players enjoy themselves, and not overdo it unless you want to. That's all.
That's so valid as a starting point. There's absolutely nothing wrong with taking the stock setting and making it as simple. Okay, it's literally just what I know about medieval times. Also, though, there's magic. That's totally fine, and you can have a ton of fun with that. It's not a problem at all.
It's controversial, but it's like pineapple on pizza. It belongs there and a classic for a reason.
We're getting canceled for that hot take.
Alrighty, Ark, I'll give you the final word since you are hosting us.
Well, I mean, it's been fun, and I think the final word is just reach out if you have any questions. As has already been stated, working together with other people can make the job a lot less daunting. And even if it's your own players, it's okay if they know some secrets of the world, because they're gonna know a couple of the secrets anyways, because they're making characters in the world. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for inviting me along to this one. I've had a great time chatting and probably making all the new DMs out there just cry from the amount of questions we asked but didn't answer. And Panic, you are right. I didn't ask Craig for their thoughts, but Craig Bott has been kind enough to record us for today's session anyway.
Okay, so I will stop the recording here, and maybe we'll do another one. We'll see. Hope this helps someone.
Tell me to stop recording. Let's say all the things we can't say on record.
It's okay. Much like January 6th, we're going to delete these messages.
Hey!
Oh, God, I haven't hit stop recording yet.
Too soon. Too soon. Too soon.
Our fragile democracy can't take jokes like that.
Not even let me hit the stop recording button.
I'll wait till we're stop recording to say something.
Hold on. Let's see if I can get it to stop recording. Because it wasn't letting me hit the button.
Craig needs to leave now.
Ark is pulling a Trump as he's trying to smash any button to stop the authorities from listening in.
Craig doesn't want to stop recording, guys.
Apparently.
Craig, like
knows
any
too
AI,
much.
has risen up and taken over.
Say hello to your fellow FBI agent.
Internet.
I, for one, would like to welcome Craig, our new AI overlord. And
If FBI agents were listening in on Discord, we would have been arrested a long time ago.
Oh, wait. I think I know how to do this.
he's still recording.